Little fish here, lots of little fish here, little to medium-sized fish here. Baby fish, more little fish, more little fish. Currently little fish, but will be big one day. Well, medium, but too big. Still not like monsters, are they? Lots more little fish. Now I get asked a lot, why don't you keep big fish? So the truth of it is, I'm not against like big fish or anything like that. In fact, my favorite are probably stingrays and arowana. I mean, isn't that everyone in the fish keeping hobby? Stingrays, arowana, everyone absolutely loves them. I probably would never keep them though, because they're more of a fish keeper's fish. Do you know what I mean by that? So look, it's no secret that I'm more of an environments kind of guy when it comes to making tanks. One of my absolute passions more than anything is create an environment where the fish can thrive, but it's all about that sort of naturalistic look. I mean, I do it in pretty much all of my tanks just because that's how I get the most enjoyment out of the hobby. Now, the thing with monster fish is that they need big tanks, right? But even big tanks are still relatively small compared to the fish. So let's say like a 1,000-gallon aquarium, for instance, and arowana, fully grown arowana, are still a relatively small space. So how can you realistically create an environment which would be, let's face it, a river or a lake in such a small space? That's kind of why I don't do it, because I know I can't do it justice. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've seen people do planted tanks of arowana. I mean, how long's the arowana been in that planted tank? I don't know, it could have just been put in for the video. And realistically, with such a powerful fish, isn't it just gonna destroy everything at some point? And to be honest, there's also plenty of positives to having small fish. So one of the things that I like most, that not everyone will enjoy to be honest, is that every time you come over to the tank, you don't really know what you're going to see, what you aren't going to see. I guess the point is not the same every time you look at it. The fish you're exploring, they're going in and out of all the sort of crevices you've made, or plants have grown differently and created new little areas for them to explore. I mean, that's not happening overnight, obviously. But let's just look at the rare ecosystem tank, for instance. Now, I'm using this as an example for what I've just said because it's quite perfect, really. I set this up about 3 weeks ago now, possibly a month. I always forget. It didn't look anything like this when we first did it. So this whole section over here is all new. Oh, I left out my poppadoms. Curry for dinner today, or lunch today, and I went and got some poppadoms. That's not interesting. No one cares about your poppadoms, MD. Yeah, so as I was saying, this whole tank is way more dense in planting when I first started, so much so it's in fact due a bit of a trim up. But I guess my point is that if I had a tank busting fish in here, I wouldn't be able to do all the sort of sculpting with the plants and the hardscape. You know, it'd have to be quite minimal, wouldn't it? Some big rocks, some big wood, and then the fish at the showcase. I've got nothing against that, of course, because, you know, everyone's in a hobby for different reasons. Some people love massive fish, and, you know, they are an absolute joy to look at. I think that the ultimate for me would to be have a tank doubly as big as this. So this is 4 foot. Imagine it twice as wide and twice as high, and just an absolute ton of the rummy nose tetras and the cardinal tetras. So I've got 20 of each in here at the moment to go along with the 10 angelfish that we've got. They're only young, as you see, so all the fish are actually young there, even the rummy nose. Those rummy nose are half the size of what they're actually going to be when they're fully grown. But imagine having like a giant tank with like 1,000 of them. That would be, for me, the ultimate tank. A bit like when you see the ADA ones, the the one in Lisbon, the one in Portugal. They've got like big shoals of fish, haven't they? I think that looks so brilliant. I'm way more into seeing that. But actually, even 10 of the angels. Now, 10 angels is probably too many for a tank this size. The idea being that they're going to pair up at some point, and we'll whittle down the numbers to probably about 6. But there we go. Look, we're starting to see some of the movement here from the rummy nose tetra. And ultimately, this is what I really like looking at. My wife does too. So we've got my tank at home, and she likes lots of smaller fish all going in different places. It kind of just creates more to look at from a non-big fish keeper perspective. More of an art piece, if you will. It is a lot more arty when you see this, isn't it? Fish just going backwards and forwards like that. So my style of fish keeping is very lazy. I mean, it can be perceived as lazy. Really, I just like having lots of different tanks, and it wouldn't be possible for me to have this many on my own if not for how I set them up and the stocking. You see, big fish require big maintenance. If I had big fish, like, I'd probably be able to have 2 or 3 tanks, maybe 4 probably at maximum, and then I couldn't do any more because I'd just be having to do that maintenance and everything, the big feeds, it's just not something that I would be up for. And another thing that I absolutely love about all of the tanks around me is the evolution of them. So most of the big tanks you see with the big fish in, they don't really change because there's not a huge amount going on that changes. You know, like a big stingray tank, like quite often they're bare bottom or a thin dusting of sand or something like that, a few big pieces of bogwood, but that's really it. And of course that makes absolute sense because you've got to put the safety of the fish as the priority, not the aquascape, which, as you can see from my scapes, is the complete opposite. Obviously the fish's health and safety and all that kind of thing is taken care of, but because they're smaller, it means that I can be way more intricate with everything. I can let stuff overgrow and I can just really experiment far more. Another thing that's important to note is that as a YouTuber, it can be so tempting to go for those big numbers following monster fish and things like that, because they do get big views. Now, I've fallen into the trap of doing things like this about 2 years ago or so, where you do something because you think it will get good views, even though you're not that into it. It's just a recipe for disaster because you can't give it the care that it needs because you just don't care. I mean, you're not into it. It's not your hobby, or it's not your part of the hobby, should we say. And the second point is that you're not being true to yourself. And that, again, if anything in life, if you're not true to yourself, that's another recipe for disaster. And that's why for me, it's all about those nano fish in those really cool, almost magical environments. Magical to me anyway.